The first time I heard the breathing, it was gentle enough to dismiss and distinct enough to remember. A slow tide rolling in a wooden shell. The kind of sound you tell yourself belongs to house settling or wind in the eaves until the house and the wind are dead still and the sound keeps going. I had just moved into the old place on Monroe and 3rd, a late Victorian with a porch that leaned like a tired shoulder and a roofline that made every sunset look a little haunted. The rental came furnished by accident, which is to say the last owner's son left what he could not carry, and what hurt too much to sell. A kitchen table with cigarette burns, 2 mismatched chairs, and a wardrobe that dominated the back bedroom like an altar to stubborn trees. Tall, cedar-lined, dovetailed with care that felt like devotion, heavy enough that the movers swore under their breath and set it against the inside wall with a thud I felt in my knees. When the last box was stacked and the last receipt signed, I lay on the floor to catch my breath, and the house returned the favor from the wardrobe. Slow, inhale. Slower, exhale. A pause that said it could wait longer than I could. I laughed, because people laugh when their skin tries to rise off their bones, and I walked over and swung both doors wide. Inside hung a single wire hanger and the faint scent of old cologne and wood smoke, the ghost of a man who favored pressed shirts and winter fires. Empty. Quiet. My phone's decibel app showed nothing useful. My ears argued otherwise. I closed the doors, and the breathing returned with the hinge settling into the strike like a jaw closing around a word. That night I fell asleep on a mattress on the floor with the wardrobe looming at the foot like a guardian and a threat, and woke at 2 to the sound of measured breath with no body attached, a patience I could not match, a presence I could not see. I slept anyway because exhaustion is a kind of faith. In daylight, the story got easier. The house was a network of drafts. The wardrobe sat on an interior wall with a cold chimney on the other side. Air goes where the pressure sends it. I wedged shims under one corner to level it and did not look at the scratches already dug into the floorboards where someone before me had dragged it into the same spot and told themselves the same reasonable things. I set up my life around it because it dominated the room no matter where it stood, and because part of me liked the solidity of it, the way the grain ran like water turned into stone, the way it smelled like pencil shavings and churches. I hung my coat inside and shut the door, and listened with my forehead against the wood, a child's position if you remove the shame, and heard nothing until I stepped back, and the breath resumed from far back inside the box like it had waited for the space to be clear. On the 3rd night, I decided to solve it the adult way, which is to say, I recorded it. I put my phone inside on voice memo, closed the doors, left the room, counted 3 minutes, came back, listened. The file contained 30 seconds of silence, a pop of hinge, and my own footsteps coming to collect it. I recorded again with the doors open and captured the noise of my lungs and the traffic on Monroe. I recorded with the heat off and the heat on and the windows sealed and the windows cracked, and the result was always the same. Inside it was quiet. Outside it breathed. The wardrobe had opinions about being watched. I was not alone in the house, but it felt that way after midnight. My girlfriend was in and out on work trips that first month and did not hear the breathing the few nights she stayed because the house is kind to people who do not look directly at it. When I told her, she said pipes, and when I persisted, she said stress. And when I kept waking at 2 with my heart trying to match a rhythm that was not mine, she said doctor, which is another word for a person who will nod at you until you nod back. I did not see a doctor. I saw the antique store. It sat 3 blocks from the river with a window that always smelled of dust, and a man behind the counter who knew more about expectations than about names. I brought photos and measurements and a scrap of cedar I found loose in the back of the wardrobe, where a small panel refused to sit flush. He ran a finger over the edge of the splinter with the same solemnity my father used to give to a level bubble. Hand-cut dovetails, he said. Probably regional. The cedar lining means someone paid for moths to die politely. He asked whether there was a maker's mark, and I said only 3 letters burned into the underside of a shelf. WPF. Small and neat. He nodded like I had confirmed something. Ward and Plimpton Furniture, he said. then corrected himself to Ward and Phelps because memory makes mistakes out loud when you live alone too long. They made coffins one winter when the influenza came, and men who built dressers learned grief with a tape measure. Sometimes a cabinet gets built by a man who has built too many boxes that close, and he forgets to leave a piece for light. I stood there like a person who did not want to understand. He asked whether it breathed, and I relaxed because he smiled like a joke had landed. When I did not smile, he folded the cedar chip into a paper bag as if the act could absolve both of us, and said, "Old wood sings, kid. The house sings with it. Do not sleep with the doors closed." For the next week, I left the wardrobe ajar the way people let a dog choose his path. The breathing became a suggestion under the noise of life, a throat clearing in another room. I set a fan on a timer to break the pressure patterns, and I slept better under its cheap white rush until I woke to silence so complete I could hear my own blood, and then, like a hand finding mine in a dark theater, the wardrobe exhaled long and low. I sat up and watched the edges of the doors until my eyes invented lines that were not there. I spoke into the dark, which I do not recommend. I said hello softly, the way you speak to a child who might be asleep. And the breathing paused in the polite way a person pauses to let you finish, and then resumed with a lengthening of the exhale that sounded like a sigh. I told myself my brain had learned a trick, and my ears obeyed, and I turned on the lamp, and light cut the trick in half, and the breath did not stop. It went on at a pace that felt like a metronome deliberately set wrong, so that your sense of rhythm constantly refuses and then surrenders. In the morning, there was condensation on the inner side of the right door that traced the shape of a palm. I placed my hand against the outline, and it met the wood as wood, cool and indifferent. Sleep deprivation makes detectives out of cowards. I pulled the wardrobe from the wall inch by inch, and the floorboards did not like it. Behind it, I found a rectangle of wallpaper exactly the size of its back, unfaded and clean amid decades of sunlight, a silhouette that proves the negative. At the bottom corner of the back panel, a small gap had opened where the cedar had shrunk. I put my eye to it and saw darkness with the promise of more darkness. Behind the back ran a cavity no wider than my hand, and as tall as the box, a void built into the structure for reasons I could not guess. I slid my phone into the gap with the camera on and watched the screen show only wood and dust until it caught a glint like a dull coin deep inside. When I pulled the phone out, the lens carried a smear that smelled faintly sweet, like preserved fruit gone to vinegar. I pried the back carefully not to break, and released a seam of air that warmed as it met me. Inside the void lay nothing I could name. The glint was old varnish. The smell rose and fell like breath trapped in fabric and finally free. The cavity was empty. It sounded full. You cannot ask a landlord to fix a piece of furniture he did not list. You cannot ask a girlfriend to sleep beside a box that exhales and expect her to nod. I moved the wardrobe into the hallway and slept in the back room without it, and the house slept with me until 2 when I woke to the sound of air drawing slow through wood from 6 feet away. The breathing had not belonged to location. It belonged to the object. I dragged the thing into the living room because irrational problems inspire irrational solutions, and fell asleep on the couch with the doors open and the cavity gaping. At 2, the house inhaled from the direction of the kitchen. I told myself I was hearing the hum of the refrigerator, and then the exhale came from the hallway, then the next inhale from 2 rooms away, then a small, soft sound by my feet like someone testing the floor with a bare heel. I refused the fear and closed my eyes and counted, and the breath matched my numbers with a child's mean grace, sometimes late, sometimes early, never perfect, always close enough to pull me off my own rhythm. When my girlfriend returned, she stood in the doorway and said, "What did you do?" And I said nothing. And we both watched the wardrobe draw and release air it did not have. People will tell you to burn it. People who have never watched an old house in February will tell you to put it on the curb and let the snow bury decisions. I called the son who had left the furniture, and he answered with a voice that creaked like a drawer someone opened once too often. He said the wardrobe belonged to his father's father and came from a farmhouse outside Meadville, and that it was heavy enough to kill half a Saturday, and that he had always planned to refinish it when time became generous in ways it never did. I asked whether it ever made sounds, and he said it creaked like any wood, and I said breathing, and he did not speak for a count of 5. Then he told me a story. When he was a boy, he hid inside during hide and seek and heard someone breathing with him in the dark, and thought his cousin had found the same spot, and when he whispered, "Keep quiet," the breathing did not change, and when he pushed the door to step out, something pushed back twice softly as if to ask for patience. He did not hide in it again. His mother wrapped cedar blocks in old socks and tucked them in the corners, and his father told him never to leave the doors closed overnight because wood swells and catches. The son said grief had too many rooms when his father died, and he did not have space for that one. I asked whether there was a key, and he said no. And then he asked whether I planned to keep it, and I said I did not know. And we hung up like men who had agreed to lie to each other elegantly. The first night the breathing answered a question I knew I had crossed into something that required manners. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and said, "If there is someone there, tell me what you need." And then the inhale lengthened and the exhale came on a pulse of warmth through the crack at the back panel. A breath that smelled like cedar and winter and another person's shirt. It did not say help or leave. It occupied. It wanted company or obedience or both. I asked whose breath it was, and the sound paused just long enough to feel like a man considering, and then resumed with an emphasis on the exhale that felt like a hand pressing my chest. My own lungs slowed to match, and I pulled back before the rhythm captured me, because a small part of me was a child who had been told never to let a stranger set the pace. That night I dreamed of a row of coffins built too fast by men paid by the piece, and of a cabinet built on the same bench with the same hands and not enough difference between jobs. The cabinet waited longer than any widow. The house grew more crowded with the wardrobe in the living room. Friends came and said cool peace and sat as far from it as manners allowed. The dog would not cross the threshold. My girlfriend went back to staying over only when the work week demanded because sleep now cost her clarity and she valued her job more than my mystery. I grew used to the breathing the way you grow used to a clock you swore would keep you awake forever. It became background until it did not. The night it matched me exactly, I understood a new danger. It started faint, then stronger. Then it synced with my inhale so perfectly that I felt a double pull, as if I were breathing for 2 people. The exhale followed with a small lag that made me feel generous and then greedy, and then guilty for not being pure about any of those adjectives. I stood fast, playing a game with a thing that does not blink. I sped up. It kept pace. I held my breath. It waited. The waiting outlasted mine by a margin that made me feel like a child bragging that he can hold ice longer than a river holds winter. When I finally exhaled, the wardrobe exhaled with a sound that had weight and ended with a small whistle like air through teeth. Research is how the anxious punish themselves. I went to the Historical Society and asked for anything on Ward and Phelps and their strange winter of coffin making. The volunteer smiled because he liked nouns and brought me ledgers with ink that had gone the color of tea. Men's names, widows' names, a week in 1919 when the numbers soared, an order for cedar-lined chests in the spring with the same foreman's signature. No story, only columns. In a box of clippings, I found a single column inch from the local sheet, a fire in a furniture workshop where one man died of smoke and longing. At the library, a microfilm of a county fair advertisement showed a Ward and Phelps display of hope chests and dressers, and a wardrobe with a ribbon pinned to the door for craftsmanship, and I hated the black and white way that pride looks innocent forever. I took my anger home like groceries. When strange things happen to lonely people, they start thinking the world has arranged itself around their attention. I tried to push back with labor. I sanded the back panel and rubbed oil into the cedar until it drank without sheen. I braced the base. I lifted with my legs because lifting with my back is how my father's friends ended up in chairs that never faced windows. I could not change the cavity. It was integral. It drank oil too. At the bottom, I found 4 shallow scratches that formed a rectangle the size of a hand mirror. I pressed and the panel gave a fraction as if it remembered a hinge and a secret. The breath warmed. I stopped. People die in stories because they want to open one more thing. The first time the breathing followed me down the hall without the wardrobe, I felt the house decide I belonged to a larger room. It was a small sound behind my right shoulder that matched me closely and shifted left when I turned, a companion that prefers your blind spot. I walked into the kitchen and out and into the bathroom and out, and it came with me until I stood at the top of the basement stairs and listened to the warm house breathe from the bottom step. The dog whined without barking. I went down 3 steps and the air grew warmer and then warmer again, and the breath became a corridor ahead of me, a tunnel you crawl through with your lungs. I backed up and it lessened, and I smiled in a way that did not feel like mine. I told the wardrobe I would move it back to the bedroom because I wanted boundaries, even if I invented them. It went on breathing like a person who knows the gate is ornamental. The night of the storm, I learned where the breath came from. Lightning rolled our block like a drum line, and the power blinked and paused, and the house remembered candlelight like a song. The wardrobe dimmed when the power died and brightened when the power returned, and the breathing did not care either way. Between flashes, I heard another sound, a high, soft note under the exhale, as if something small rode the tide and sang on the crest. I put my ear to the back panel, and the high note became clearer, a child's hum with no melody, the sound people make when they have nothing to do with their mouth and too much to do with their fear. I pressed the 4 scratches again, and the panel moved another fraction, and the hum stopped. I whispered, "I am sorry," and meant it, and the breath resumed with no trace of offense. Thunder rattled the glass, and a memory arrived that my family did not give me. A man in a shop counting 50 nails into a paper bag for a widow who wanted to build a hope chest for a child she did not get to keep. He looked at the boards and looked at his hands and knew both could hold so much and not enough. He built a wardrobe that would always sound like breathing because he wanted a room where a child could sleep without choking on a world that had run out of air. He built it wrong because love and grief are not carpenters, or he built it right, and I do not want to know for whom. The next morning, my girlfriend said she could not do this anymore, which is a sentence that feels like you are the this, and the anymore, and also the can. She said the house made everything feel like a second choice, and the wardrobe made everything feel like a test, and she packed 2 bags and kissed my forehead in a way that told me I would not see her again in a week, or it would take years to learn the word for how we would remain. I watched her drive away and sat with the wardrobe like a penitent. I told it out loud that I understood the nature of pacts, and I was not making one. The breath did not speed or slow. That night I slept on the floor with my head against the cedar because I did not want the sound to sneak up on me. I dreamed of dust motes like snow turning in light, and of lungs full of cedar scent, and of a child counting 1, 2, 3 while trying not to cry. When I woke, my cheek was damp, and the breath matched the slow calm of someone sleeping beside me. I let myself like it for a minute because humans are weak, and then I pulled away because humans must also choose. I tried to sell the wardrobe. The antique man declined with apologies that sounded like prayers. Online buyers asked for measurements and delivery and then ghosted when I said, "Pickup only." A stranger messaged that they would take it sight unseen for a price double what I asked if I would leave it on the porch and trust the money would appear. I said no, because greed is how people end up with stories about losing more than a wardrobe. I made a sign that said free and took it down 10 minutes later because I do not believe in making other people a problem without explaining the rules. I considered burning it and my chest tightened like a fist. I pictured the breath turning to smoke and filling the trees and wished for a world where fire solved the oldest questions and then remembered it rarely does. The thing about breathing is that it is both automatic and decided. One night in August, I decided to climb inside. I took the wire hanger out like a relic and set it across the back of a chair. I knelt and put a palm flat against the floor to feel for nails and splinters, and found smooth cedar worn by shoes that stepped in and stepped out for a lifetime. I sat inside with my knees bent, and my head bowed and closed the doors, and I felt stupid until the air changed. Warmer, sweeter, close enough to make my shoulders relax and my heart beat slower without permission. The breathing filled the space around my face, and then held off an inch like a stranger giving you room in a slow elevator. I said, "I am here," in a voice I did not mean to be small, and the breath paused in a way that felt like a nod. I asked, "What are you?" and the wardrobe exhaled with a sound like paper over a comb, that corrugated buzz that kids love. And I understood that it would never say a thing in words, and that understanding it would require letting it change my pace. I sat until my legs went pins and needles and the air became confusing, and then I reached for the handle and it did not turn. The latch had slipped. The old catch had found a way to answer a question I had not asked. For 3 breaths, I panicked like a man knocked down by a wave, and then I found the small gap at the back and moved the 4 scratches with my finger, and the panel gave, and something inside the cavity shifted with a sound like cloth. The handle turned. The door opened. I crawled out and lay on the floor, and the breathing went on like a tide I had not affected. What shifted inside that cavity did not belong to any of my stories yet. I waited until morning and removed the back completely in the calm light of coffee. The cavity held a canvas bundle tied with twine, stained a darker cedar color the way a cutting board stains with years of use, and only the shape tells you what was cooked. The twine came away easy, and the canvas unrolled to reveal a child's blanket, hand-knit, green gone brown, smelling like the ache of a long hallway. Under it lay a small wooden rattle, smooth from palms, and a newspaper clipping folded twice with a date, and the words that count the dead when a city learns it does not have enough breath to go around. I am not a man who cries at artifacts. I cried. I put the blanket to my face, and the smell knocked me back in time, not to a memory I own, but to a room where someone walked the floor with a weight that only weighs on rooms like that. I saw a woman stand in a doorway and make her lungs steady, because hers were the only pace that mattered. I saw a man count nails to get his hands back. I saw a wardrobe built to make a sound that tricks a body into believing someone else is still there. I put the things back with care. I closed the back and I sat with my hand on the cedar for the length of a song. After that, the breathing felt less like a threat. It felt like a chore I had inherited, a narrow and necessary job. I learned its moods. When storms rolled in, the inhale grew shallow, as if the house braced for pressure. On dry days in winter, the exhale went long, as if drying racks had been set inside. When I left town for 2 nights to try sleeping somewhere with no furniture older than my grandparents, I returned to a house that felt feverish. The wardrobe's breath ran fast like a runner at 12 miles who can see the turn and refuses water. I sat on the floor and matched it like a medic, and it calmed grudgingly the way a dog admits you know the routine. I told it aloud that I would not always live here, and it made a sound like a laugh or a cough at the idea of always. I did not bring anyone home for months because the house belonged to an arrangement. Friends visited and left with polite lies about early mornings. My girlfriend texted from Denver sometimes with photos of hotel lamps and later with photos of a different life, and I typed and deleted and finally sent her the picture of the blanket and wrote, "I think I understand now." And she did not ask for what. In the night, a small, high hum sometimes threaded the breath, and I felt lonely and less lonely at once. If this story had a single, clean ending, I would carve it here with a sentence that makes your shoulders fall. Houses do not grant that. One night in October, the breathing stopped. I woke to absence so pure the room sounded like a held note. I sat up and waited and nothing came. I walked to the wardrobe and opened the doors, and the cedar smelled like cedar. I closed the doors and the house did not resist. I went down the hall and listened at the basement door and heard nothing but the refrigerator's hard-working heart. I lay down and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep because the quiet did not feel like mercy. At 2:15, the wardrobe inhaled in a single vast draw that made my ears pop. The exhale that followed came from the room and the hall and the stairwell and the world. The lights dimmed without flicker. The air warmed to the point of sweat. I stood with my back to the wall and forgot the rules, and the doors of the wardrobe opened on their own, Not wide, just enough to show a darker dark inside. The breath became voice without words, an instruction born from pacing and counting in grief. Come keep the rhythm. I stepped forward because we all step forward eventually. To the altar, to the crib, to the bed, to the bench, to the ship, to the door. I put my hand on the cedar and said, I will walk with you. And the exhale eased, not like victory, but like relief. I walked the length of the hall, slow, in counts of 4. The house matched me. I walked back. The house matched again. The wardrobe settled into the room the way a sleeping person finds the cool side of the pillow. The heat bled away. The lights forgot to be dim. I stood until my calves ached and my eyes burned, and I understood that this would be the price for having opened that back panel and called the breath by a name that can only be counted, not spoken. So I keep the pace. At night, I walk the hall in a quiet loop for minutes that turn into hours, while the wardrobe breathes in and out like the ocean listening to news. When I travel, I leave the doors open and a metronome on the dresser and a fan on low because small lies calm wood. Sometimes I stand in the doorway of the room and imagine the man who built this box from cedar boards paid for with nickels and loss, and I hope someone told him it worked, even if it worked wrong. Sometimes I hold the blanket, and when I do, the high hum threads the breath with gratitude or memory, or something my words will make untrue if I push too hard. There are nights when I think I hear my own breathing from inside the wardrobe, a perfect match beginning before I draw air, and I remind myself that memory can lead you into places you built to keep other people safe. There are mornings when I wake with my cheek against cedar and a schedule on my tongue, and I laugh because people are strange machines. If you ask whether it is dangerous, I will say yes, because anything that needs something from you forever is a risk. If you ask whether it is evil, I will say no, because evil is wasteful, and this is careful. If you ask whether you should take home old furniture left by men who could not throw it away, I will say, read the back, listen at the door, and decide whether you can keep a promise. The wardrobe breathes because someone needed it to, and no one had the courage or cruelty to teach it to stop. I am not certain I have either. On winter nights when the house is smaller than my feet, and the street lamp on Monroe makes everything a staged play, I think about the future owner who will ask why the floors are scratched in a circle, and I will leave a note that says, walk at night. Count to 4. Do not close the doors. Do not open the back unless you are willing to be a person who hums. The story will outlive me because wood does that, and breath does too when it finds a space that agrees to hear it. If you hear breathing from a closet you know is empty and you are alone, do not assume you are the first. Someone built that room to keep pace with a heart that went quiet. The only question is whether you are the sort of person who can keep walking, or whether you will try to sleep through it. I tried and failed. The wardrobe forgave me by teaching me a rhythm that leaves no space for pretend. It is breathing now as I finish this, slow and patient and almost kind. I will walk the hall before bed. I will count to 4 until the house sighs itself steady. I will leave the doors open. I will not ask for thanks. The cedar will remember the rest.